Why does a nation that has endured conquest after conquest by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, still speak a language traceable back 2,500 years, still draw upon poets from the 11th century, still hold itself to be inheritor of a civilization older than most nations even know they possess? The very fact of Iran's survival challenges our usual assumptions about what happens when empires fall. This book is titled History of Iran, Empire of the Mind. That subtitle signals something profound. It suggests Iran's power has never been reducible to territory or armies. It has endured through ideas, language, culture, and a sense of civilizational continuity. That continuity survived conquest after conquest. Previous histories treated Iran as a sequence of dynasties. They made it a backdrop to great power rivalries. Axworthy does something different. He asks not just what happened, but what persisted, and why the idea of Iran survived when so many empires did not. Michael Axworthy served as head of the Iran section at the British Foreign Office. He later became a lecturer in Arabic and Islamic studies at the University of Exeter. He has written extensively on Iranian history. His works include The Sword of Persia, Nader Shah, and Revolutionary Iran. His scholarship stands within the tradition of British Iranian studies. That tradition was pioneered by Edward Granville Brown and Anne Lampt. But Axworthy brings a crucial difference. Earlier scholars often treated Iran through the lens of Western imperial interest. Axworthy approaches it as a civilization in its own right. Its internal logic and cultural continuity demand understanding on their own terms. The story begins not with a king or a battle, but with a prophet whose ideas would outlast empires. Around 1500 BCE, somewhere on the Iranian plateau, a priest named Zoroaster experienced a vision. That plateau is a high, arid expanse. It stretches from modern Iraq to Afghanistan. Zoroaster saw the world as a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. This was revolutionary. Most ancient religions worshipped many gods who behaved like powerful humans. Zoroaster preached something different, one supreme god, a moral universe where humans chose their fate. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Fire became a sacred symbol, not because it was divine, but because it represented truth and purity. This faith spread across the Iranian plateau. It spread among tribes who called themselves Aryans. That word meant noble or free. They were pastoralists, moving with herds, fighting over grassland. But Zoroastrianism gave them something beyond tribal identity. It gave them an ethical framework that transcended clan loyalty. When these tribes eventually settled and built cities, that framework persisted. By the 6th century BCE, one dynasty had united most of these Iranian peoples, the Achaemenids. Their founder, Cyrus the Great, conquered the Median Kingdom in 550 BCE. He swept through Anatolia. He moved down into Mesopotamia. He captured Babylon in 539 BCE without a fight. His method was unusual. He did not massacre populations or burn temples. Instead, he allowed conquered peoples to keep their religions. They kept their customs, their local rulers. They acknowledged Persian overlordship and paid tribute. When Cyrus entered Babylon, he issued a decree. It was recorded on a clay cylinder now in the British Museum. He declared that he came as liberator, not conqueror. He restored local gods to their temples. He allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Those Jews had been exiled to Babylon decades earlier. The Hebrew Bible calls him Messiah, the Anointed One. Here historians disagree. Some see Cyrus as a cynical pragmatist. They say he knew conquest through tolerance cost less than conquest through force. Others see genuine ideological commitment to Zoroastrian principles of justice and truth. What matters is the pattern he established. The Achaemenid Empire became the largest the world had yet seen. It stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, from Central Asia to Egypt. It endured not through constant military repression, but through administrative sophistication. Cyrus's successors refined the system. Darius the First took power in 522 BCE after crushing a series of rebellions. He reorganized the empire into satrapies. These were provinces governed by satraps, or provincial governors. Each satrap collected taxes, each maintained order, each provided troops when required. But Darius built something else that mattered more: a road system. The royal road ran from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in western Iran, over 1,600 miles. Mounted couriers could cover it in 9 days. Messages traveled faster than armies. Information became power. Darius also standardized coinage, weights, and measures across the empire. He commissioned a new script. Old Persian cuneiform recorded royal inscriptions. And he built Persepolis, a ceremonial capital whose ruins still stand in southern Iran. Its reliefs show delegations from across the empire bringing tribute, but they are depicted with dignity, not as conquered slaves. Each wears their own ethnic dress. Each brings gifts appropriate to their homeland. Then came the collision with Greece. In 490 BCE, Darius sent an expedition to punish Athens. Athens had supported a Greek revolt in Anatolia. The Persians landed at Marathon. The Athenians marched out to meet them and won. 10 years later, Darius's son Xerxes tried again with a massive force. He bridged the Hellespont. He marched through northern Greece. He destroyed Athens, but his fleet was shattered at Salamis. His army was crushed at Plataea. Persia never conquered mainland Greece. Western histories often treat this as civilizational triumph, free Greece versus despotic Persia. But that view is simplistic. The Persians were not barbarians. They had literature, art, administrative genius. What they lacked was the Greek phalanx and the Athenian trireme. The wars were tactical defeats, not proof of cultural superiority. And crucially, they did not destroy the Achaemenid Empire. Persia remained the world's dominant power for another century and a half. The empire finally fell not to Greeks fighting for freedom, but to a Macedonian king seeking glory. Alexander invaded in 334 BCE. He destroyed the Persian army at Issus, then again at Gaugamela. He burned Persepolis. Whether accidentally during a drunken revel or deliberately as revenge, sources disagree. By 330 BCE, the last Achaemenid king, Darius III, was dead. He was murdered by his own nobles. Here comes the cognitive reversal. Alexander conquered Persia militarily, but Persia conquered Alexander culturally. Within years of victory, Alexander adopted Persian dress. He adopted Persian court ceremony, Persian administrative practices. He married a Persian noblewoman, Roxana. He ordered his generals to marry Persian women. He tried to blend Macedonian and Persian elites into a single ruling class. His Greek and Macedonian soldiers hated this. They saw it as betrayal. They mutinied, but Alexander persisted. Why? Because he understood something his men did not. Military conquest means nothing without administrative continuity, and the Persians had perfected administration over 2 centuries. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, his empire fractured. His general Seleucus took the eastern territories, including Iran. The Seleucid dynasty ruled from Syria. They imposed Greek language and culture on the cities. But outside the cities, Iranian culture endured. The villages, the countryside, the plateau itself remained Iranian. Language survived. Customs survived. The Zoroastrian priesthood, the Magi, continued teaching, performing rituals, maintaining the sacred fires. Then, in the mid-3rd century BCE, a new Iranian dynasty emerged from the northeast. The Parthians. They were originally a nomadic tribe from the region south of the Caspian Sea. They adopted elements of Hellenistic culture. Greek appeared on their coins. They used Greek-style art. But they governed according to Iranian traditions. Their military strength came from mounted archers. These archers could fire backwards while retreating, a tactic that devastated Roman legions at Carrhae in 53 BCE. The Parthians ruled for nearly 5 centuries. They were not empire builders in the Achaemenid mold. They allowed vassal kings considerable autonomy. They encouraged trade along the Silk Road. That road linked China to the Mediterranean. They adopted no single-state religion, though Zoroastrianism remained dominant. What they did do was preserve the idea of Iran as a distinct civilization, separate from Rome to the west, separate from the steppe nomads to the east. By the 3rd century CE, the Parthian system was failing. Civil wars weakened central authority. Then, in 224 CE, a regional ruler from Fars led a revolt. Fars was the old Achaemenid heartland. His name was Ardashir. He claimed descent from the Achaemenids. He defeated the last Parthian king and founded a new dynasty, the Sassanids. The Sassanids were ideological in ways the Parthians never were. They made Zoroastrianism the state religion. They persecuted Christians, Manichaeans, and other religious minorities. They centralized administration, reducing the power of vassal kings. They built a professional bureaucracy. That bureaucracy was staffed by the nobility and the priesthood. They revived the cultural memory of Achaemenid greatness. They commissioned new versions of epic stories. Those stories would eventually become the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. For 4 centuries, the Sassanids ruled an empire that rivaled Rome and, later, Byzantium. Their capital, Ctesiphon, near modern Baghdad, was among the world's great cities. Their silks, their metalwork, their architecture influenced cultures from Europe to China. And then, everything changed. In 632 CE, the Prophet Muhammad died in Medina. Within decades, Arab armies surged out of the Arabian Peninsula. They moved with astonishing speed. The Sassanid Empire was exhausted by war with Byzantium. It could not hold. At the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636, Arab forces shattered the Persian army. The Sassanid emperor fled eastward. By 651, the last Sassanid king was murdered by one of his own governors. The empire that had stood for 4 centuries collapsed in 20 years. The Arabs brought a new religion, Islam. They brought a new language, Arabic. They brought a new political order, the Caliphate. Many expected Persian culture to vanish under this wave. It did not. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Iranians converted to Islam, but they transformed it. They preserved their language by adapting it with Arabic script. They kept their poetry, their music, their sense of identity. Within a century, Persian administrators ran the Abbasid Caliphate from Baghdad. Persian was the language of courtly culture from Anatolia to India. This was the Iranian reconquest, not by armies, but by minds. The early Islamic period saw the rise of Persian scholars who shaped Islamic thought itself. Men like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. His medical texts were studied in European universities for centuries. Men like Al-Khwarizmi. His name gave us the word algorithm. His work on mathematics revolutionized science, but something deeper was stirring. A new form of Islamic spirituality emerged: Sufism. The Sufis were mystics who sought direct experience of God. They used meditation, poetry, and discipline. Many of the greatest Sufi poets wrote in Persian. They used verse to express truths that philosophy could not reach. Rumi, born in what is now Afghanistan in 1207, became perhaps the most famous. His poetry spoke of divine love with an intensity that transcended religious boundaries. When he wrote, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there," he was speaking in a Persian idiom. That idiom married Islamic devotion with Iranian sensibility. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century should have ended this flowering. In 1219, Genghis Khan's forces swept into Iran. They destroyed cities. They slaughtered populations. Estimates suggest millions died. The city of Nishapur was razed so completely that later scholars debated whether it had ever existed. Yet even the Mongols were absorbed. Within 2 generations, Mongol rulers in Iran converted to Islam. They patronized Persian poets and scholars. The conquerors became culturally conquered. This pattern repeated across centuries. Invasion followed by cultural absorption. The Turks came and became Persian in culture. The Seljuks ruled, but their courts spoke Persian. Time and again, military power conquered Iran, only to be conquered by Iranian civilization. Then came a transformation that would define modern Iran. In 1501, a teenage warrior named Ismail declared himself Shah of Iran. He was the leader of a militant Sufi order called the Safavids. His followers were the Qizilbash, or Redheads. That name came from their distinctive turbans. They believed he was divinely chosen. Within a decade, he had united most of Iran under one throne. This was the first time in centuries. But Ismail did something unprecedented. He declared that Iran would be Shia. Shi'ism is the branch of Islam that believes leadership should have passed through Ali. Ali was the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. The split between Sunni and Shia Islam goes back to the 7th century. It began with arguments over succession and authority. For most of Islamic history, Shias were a minority scattered across the Muslim world. Ismail made Shi'ism the state religion by force. Sunni scholars were executed or expelled. Shia scholars were imported from Syria and Lebanon. The population was converted, sometimes willingly, often under pressure. This was not just a political move. It was an act of cultural engineering. It would separate Iran from its Sunni neighbors forever. The Safavid dynasty ruled Iran for over 2 centuries. Their capital, Isfahan, became one of the world's most beautiful cities. Shah Abbas the Great ruled from 1588 to 1629. He built mosques, palaces, and gardens that still astonish visitors. He also centralized power. He created a standing army. He traded with European powers who were eager for allies against the Ottoman Empire. But the Safavids had made enemies. To the west, the Ottoman Empire was Sunni, Turkish, and vast. It saw Shia Iran as a heretical threat. Wars between the two empires became routine. To the east, the Uzbeks raided and plundered. By the early 18th century, the Safavid state had weakened. Local warlords grew powerful. The court grew corrupt. In 1722, Afghan forces invaded and captured Isfahan. The Safavid dynasty collapsed into chaos. What followed was one of the strangest episodes in Iranian history. A military commander named Nader Khan emerged from the wreckage. He drove out the Afghans. He restored order. In 1736, he crowned himself Nader Shah. Nader was a military genius. He conquered Afghanistan. He invaded India. He sacked Delhi. He brought back treasures including the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. His armies reached as far as Central Asia. For a moment, he seemed to be rebuilding the Persian Empire in its ancient glory. But Nader grew paranoid. He ordered mass executions. He blinded his own son. He tried to reverse Iran's Shia identity to ease relations with Sunni neighbors. This move alienated his own people. In 1747, his own officers assassinated him. Iran fell into decades of chaos. Warlords fought for control, tribes raided and pillaged. Finally, in 1796, a new dynasty emerged, the Qajars. They were a Turkic tribe, but they ruled in the Persian tradition. Their capital was Tehran. Until then, it had been a minor city. The Qajars inherited an Iran that was weakening just as Europe was rising. Britain and Russia were expanding their empires. They saw Iran as a strategic prize, a buffer, a route to India, a source of influence. The Qajar Shahs tried to modernize, but they lacked resources and faced internal resistance. In the 19th century, Iran lost territory. The Russians took the Caucasus through a series of humiliating wars. The British dictated commercial terms. Foreign powers controlled Iran's roads, its telegraphs, its customs. National sovereignty was eroding. Frustration grew. Religious scholars, the ulama, saw Western influence as a threat to Islam. Intellectuals saw corruption and weakness at the throne. Merchants resented foreign monopolies. In 1891, the Shah granted a British company a monopoly over Iran's tobacco trade. The entire country erupted in protest. A senior cleric issued a fatwa declaring tobacco use forbidden under the monopoly. Iranians stopped smoking overnight. Even, legend says, the Shah's own wives. The monopoly was cancelled. It was a small victory, but it showed that popular resistance could challenge the throne. The pressure built toward something larger. In 1905, protests broke out in Tehran. Merchants closed their shops. Religious students took sanctuary in mosques. The demands grew bolder, not just reform, but a constitution, a parliament, limits on royal power. The constitutional revolution had begun. After months of unrest, in 1906, the aging Shah granted a constitution. Iran would have an elected parliament, the Majlis. It would have written laws. The monarchy would be constrained by principle, not just by force. The Shah died days later. His successor tried to reverse the revolution. Civil war erupted. Foreign powers, Russia and Britain, intervened to protect their interests. The revolution succeeded, but the constitution it won was fragile from the start. Iran entered the 20th century with ancient pride and modern fragility. The Pahlavi dynasty promised modernization. Reza Shah seized power in 1921. He crowned himself 5 years later. His model was Ataturk's Turkey. Secular, centralized, forcibly modernized. He built railways. He reformed the army. He weakened the ulama. He replaced Islamic dress codes with European suits. Women were forbidden to wear the veil. The state enforced this by force. But modernization came with brutality. Political dissent was crushed. Tribal leaders were executed. The clergy lost their courts, their schools, their authority. Iran was being remade from above, whether its people consented or not. Reza Shah was deposed by the Allies in 1941. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, took the throne. The young Shah faced immediate crisis. The economy collapsed. Regional powers, Britain and the Soviet Union, occupied Iranian territory. Nationalist movements demanded sovereignty. The most significant was led by Mohammad Mossadegh. He became prime minister in 1951. His platform was simple: nationalize the oil industry. For decades, British companies had extracted Iranian oil while paying minimal royalties. Mossadegh argued that Iran's resources belonged to Iran. The nationalization passed parliament overwhelmingly. Britain responded with economic sanctions. It blocked Iranian oil exports. The United States initially supported neutrality, but Cold War logic intervened. American officials feared Mossadegh's alliance with leftist parties. They feared Soviet influence. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup. Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah returned with strengthened powers. The 1953 coup transformed Iranian politics. The Shah became increasingly authoritarian. He established SAVAK. That was a secret police notorious for torture and surveillance. Political parties were banned or neutered. The clergy was marginalized again. Oil revenues funded grand projects, dams, factories, universities, but also corruption and extravagance. The Shah's modernization program was called the White Revolution. It included land reform, women's suffrage, and literacy campaigns. On paper, it promised progress. In practice, it alienated traditional society. Landlords lost their estates. Peasants flooded the cities with no jobs waiting. The clergy saw their social base eroded. Economic growth enriched the elite, while inflation devastated ordinary families. Opposition emerged from an unexpected source. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was a senior cleric in Qom. Qom was the center of Shi'i scholarship. In 1963, he delivered a speech condemning the Shah's policies. He accused the regime of destroying Islam, betraying the nation, and serving foreign powers. He was arrested. Protests erupted. Hundreds were killed. Khomeini was exiled, first to Turkey, then Iraq, finally France. From exile, Khomeini developed a revolutionary ideology. Traditional Shi'i scholars had avoided direct political rule. They saw government as inherently corrupt until the return of the hidden imam. The hidden imam is the messianic figure Shi'is believe will one day reappear. Khomeini rejected this quietism. He argued that in the imam's absence, senior clerics should rule. The fuqaha, those versed in Islamic jurisprudence. This was called velayat-e-faqih, or guardianship of the jurist. It was a radical departure, not a return to tradition, but an innovation. By the late 1970s, the Shah's regime was unraveling. Economic mismanagement caused mass unemployment. Corruption was rampant. The gap between rich and poor widened visibly. Political repression intensified. SAVAK arrested thousands. Torture became systematic. Even moderate reformers were silenced. In 1977, President Carter pressed the Shah on human rights. The regime relaxed slightly. Opposition groups sensed an opening. Protests began. Small at first, then massive. In September 1978, martial law was declared. On Black Friday, troops fired on demonstrators in Tehran. Hundreds died. The country exploded. Strikes paralyzed the economy. Oil workers stopped production. Bazaars closed. Students marched. Clerics issued denunciations. Khomeini's recorded speeches circulated on cassette tapes. His message was simple: the Shah must go. Islam must return to the center of Iranian life. The Shah fled in January 1979. Khomeini returned weeks later. Millions lined the streets. He declared, "This is not the final victory. The final victory will come when all forms of foreign influence are removed." A referendum abolished the monarchy. The Islamic Republic was declared. The revolution's early years were chaotic. Leftists, liberals, and Islamists had united against the Shah, but now fought over Iran's future. Khomeini's faction prevailed. The new constitution enshrined Velayat-e-Faqih. The supreme leader, initially Khomeini himself, held ultimate authority over all state institutions. Elected officials served below him. Revolutionary courts executed former regime officials. Political parties were banned or absorbed. The press was censored. Women were required to wear the hijab. Alcohol was prohibited. Western culture was denounced as corrupt. The revolution consumed its own. Leftist allies were purged. Ethnic minorities demanding autonomy were crushed. Then came war. In September 1980, Iraq invaded. Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity. Iran's military was in disarray after the revolution. He hoped to seize oil-rich provinces and topple Khomeini's government. The war lasted 8 years. Over 1 million died. Chemical weapons were used against Iranian troops. Cities were bombed. The economy was devastated. The war transformed the revolution. It legitimized the new regime. It created a narrative of resistance and sacrifice. It empowered the Revolutionary Guards. That was the military force loyal to the clerical establishment. It justified repression in the name of national survival, but it also exhausted the country. By 1988, when Khomeini finally accepted a ceasefire, Iran's revolutionary fervor had dimmed. Khomeini died in 1989. His successor as supreme leader was Ali Khamenei. Less charismatic, less theologically senior, but politically skilled. The presidency passed to Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. He promised reconstruction. The economy opened slightly. Relations with the West thawed cautiously, but political reform remained blocked. The clerical establishment controlled key institutions: the judiciary, the military, the media. In 1997, Mohammad Khatami was elected president. He ran on a platform of civil society, rule of law, and cultural openness. He won overwhelmingly. Young voters, women, and reformists celebrated. But Khatami's presidency exposed the system's contradictions. The president held limited power. The supreme leader and unelected councils could veto legislation, close newspapers, imprison activists. Khatami's reforms were systematically blocked. Frustration grew. In 2005, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was elected. He represented a conservative backlash. He questioned the Holocaust. He challenged Western powers. He expanded nuclear research. International sanctions tightened. The economy suffered. Inflation soared. Unemployment rose. Ahmadinejad's populist rhetoric could not compensate for economic decline. The 2009 election ignited protest. The official result declared Ahmadinejad the winner. Millions claimed fraud. The Green Movement took to the streets. The regime responded with mass arrests, torture, and killings. The protests were crushed, but the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic was permanently damaged. The author traces a recurring pattern. Iran's history is shaped by tension between imperial ambition and cultural continuity. Empires rose: Achaemenid, Safavid, Pahlavi. But they collapsed under internal contradictions and external pressure. Each tried to impose unity through force. Each failed because they ignored the deeper currents of Iranian identity: poetic, mystical, pluralistic. The Islamic Republic is the latest iteration of this struggle. It promised justice and sovereignty. It delivered repression and isolation. It tried to unify a diverse society under a single ideology. But Iran's history suggests this cannot succeed indefinitely. The country's strength has always been its intellectual flexibility, not its political rigidity. The book's central argument is this: Iran is an empire of the mind. Its power lies not in military conquest or political systems, but in language, poetry, religion, and ideas. Persians survived Greek conquest by shaping Greek culture. They outlasted Arab conquest by transforming Islam. They endured Mongol devastation by rebuilding through faith and art. This continuity is Iran's deepest resource. It is also its challenge. The modern state demands uniformity. Iranian civilization has always embraced multiplicity. The collision between these forces defines Iran's predicament today. Centralization and diversity, ideology and imagination. The author enters a long-standing debate about Iranian identity. For decades, scholars have approached Iran through distinct lenses, either as an Islamic civilization shaped by religion, or as a Persian nation defined by ethnicity and pre-Islamic heritage. The author rejects this division. He argues that Iranian identity is fundamentally syncretic, a continuous process of absorption and transformation, rather than a fixed cultural essence. This framework challenges the standard nationalist narrative. That narrative is taught in Iranian schools. It is promoted by many Western scholars. It presents a pure Persian civilization interrupted by foreign invasions. The author shows instead that each invasion became part of the tradition. The Arabs brought Islam. The Mongols brought new administrative systems. The Safavids fused Persian and Shia identity. None of these were interruptions. They were chapters in an ongoing story of creative adaptation. The book's central contribution is methodological. The author treats poetry and religious thought as primary historical evidence. Conventional historians rely on chronicles and military records. He reads Hafez and Rumi as witnesses to cultural transformation. This allows him to show how ideas moved through society, not just what rulers decreed, but what people believed and how beliefs changed over time. Yet the framework has limits. The author focuses overwhelmingly on the Persian-speaking heartland. The experiences of Iran's ethnic minorities appear only briefly: Kurds, Baluchis, Azeris. A more complete account would examine how these groups experienced the same invasions differently and how their traditions shaped Iranian identity from below rather than from the center. The book also underplays economic and material factors. The author attributes Iran's resilience primarily to culture and religion, but other historians, particularly those in the Annals school, would emphasize geography, trade routes, and agricultural systems. Iran's position between empires made it valuable to conquer and difficult to hold. Its mountain barriers created natural refuges. These structural factors deserve more attention alongside cultural explanations. Despite these gaps, the author succeeds in making Iranian history accessible without simplifying it. He writes with narrative momentum while maintaining scholarly rigor. This is an essential book for anyone seeking to understand how Iran became what it is today. What does this history mean for us now? One pattern repeats across centuries. External pressure strengthens internal cohesion. When attacked, Iranians define themselves more sharply. When left alone, they embrace diversity and debate. The Islamic Republic's rigid orthodoxy is not traditional. It is a response to decades of foreign intervention and internal crisis. This suggests a personal application. When we feel threatened, we also retreat into certainty. We define ourselves by what we oppose. We silence internal voices that complicate our identity. The Iranian story reminds us that the richest civilizations are the most open, and that defensiveness, however justified, eventually becomes its own prison. If you remember nothing else from this book, remember this one idea above all others. Culture is not something you preserve, it is something you remake. Iran survived because it absorbed what defeated it. This is uncomfortable wisdom. It means letting go of purity. It means accepting that your tradition will look different to your children than it does to you. So we return to the question, what makes a civilization resilient? The answer is not strength alone, it is the capacity to transform without losing continuity. Iran has done this for 25 centuries. Whether the Islamic Republic can do the same remains the central question of Iranian politics. This is a profound and unsettling book. It should be read by anyone who believes their own culture is under threat. The author shows that survival comes not from rigidity, but from the courage to change.